As veterans, we're no strangers to helping others.
That's what we were taught, service before self.
But we do have one question for the veterans listening.
When was the last time you reached out for help?
If you or someone you know needs resources, whether it's for stress, finances, employment, or mental health, don't wait. Reach out.
Find more information at va.gov/reach. That's va.gov/reach.
Brought to you by the United States Department of Veterans Affairs and the Ad Council.
Hey everybody, it's Ron, and I want to tell you a story about business and how that story changed everything. The argument wasn't about whether the dam would still stand. Everybody in the room already knew it would. The concrete had cured and the cannon walls had held tight. The structure itself was no longer the question. The argument was about what came next and how cautious was too cautious. Across the table, someone was arguing for another delay, another review, another layer of approval before power systems were pushed to full capacity. The risks were real. Turbines at this large of a scale had never been run before. So if there was failure, it would be pretty public and embarrassing and political. Frank Crowe listened, and then he shook his head. He didn't deny the danger. He disagreed about which danger mattered more. See, Crowe had spent most of his career on projects where waiting carried its own cost. Delays meant that crews were idle and schedules were slipping. Those kind of delays meant that pressure was building somewhere else. He had learned that systems rarely failed because they moved too fast. They failed because they were inconsistent. And this wasn't the first time he had had this argument. He'd had it with inspectors and with administrators and with anyone whose job was to prevent failure rather than deliver output. Over and over, the tension was the same. Was the priority avoiding risk, or was it making something work every day? After all the years of construction, when the dam was finished and the spectacle had faded, that argument didn't disappear, it changed form. Because now the question wasn't whether Hoover Dam would stand. It was whether it could deliver power reliably, predictably, to people who were paying for it. On February 11th, 1936, when electricity from Hoover Dam began flowing to private industry, that argument finally had an answer. But did the real economic impact of the dam come from the jobs that built it, or from the power that followed? When public infrastructure turns into a private operating input, who actually benefits? And on February 11th, 1936, did Frank Crowe's obsession with reliability quietly reshape the business geography of the American West? From Business Basics, I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the daily podcast where we explain the stories that changed business forever. Every date on the calendar has a story where business reshaped the world. Today, February 11th, that story takes us to 1936, when power became an item on a balance sheet that showed an advantage. Hoover Dam is usually remembered as a construction story. It was a New Deal project, a Depressions-era jobs engine, a monument to large scale and coordination at a time when the country needed proof that big things could still be done. And all of that is true. But it doesn't tell the complete story. By the time the dam was structurally finished, the real business question hadn't been answered yet. Jobs disappeared when the construction ended. Concrete doesn't pay dividends on its own. The dam only mattered economically if it changed how businesses operated after the ribbon cutting. And that was the kind of problem Frank Crowe had been solving his entire career. Before Hoover Dam, Crowe had worked on some of the most difficult dam projects in the country, including Arrow Rock Dam in Idaho. He wasn't a designer chasing elegance. He was an execution engineer. His reputation came from delivering projects under extreme conditions on aggressive schedules with very little tolerance for failure. At Hoover Dam, Crowe worked for a company called Six Companies Incorporated. It was a private consortium that had taken on the enormous financial risk to build the dam on time. Delays meant that there were going to be penalties, and inconsistency meant cost overruns. The mindset wasn't symbolic, it was operational. That mindset clashed with how many people thought about the project. For politicians and the public, Hoover Dam was about employment and morale and national confidence. For Frank, it was about throughput. A system that worked sometimes wasn't a system, it was actually a liability. And until electricity actually flowed to paying customers, Hoover Dam was still incomplete. When power generation began, the story shifted quietly but permanently. On February 11, 1936, electricity from Hoover Dam began flowing into regional utility systems serving Southern California and Nevada and Arizona. And this wasn't ceremonial power or limited testing. It was contracted, metered electricity entering commercial circulation, and that distinction mattered. Utilities like the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power could now offer something they previously couldn't: long-term reliability. Instead of rationing capacity or relying on smaller local generation, they could guarantee supply on a really large scale. For businesses, that changed the entire equation. Energy stopped being a variable that required constant contingency planning. Manufacturers could schedule production more aggressively. Municipal planners could approve industrial expansion without fearing brownouts or shortages. And that meant capital investment became easier to justify when one of the most critical inputs was no longer uncertain. This wasn't about innovation or intelligence. It was about predictability. Hoover Dam didn't think. It didn't adapt. It delivered. It delivered capacity consistently at a scale that removed hesitation from decision-making. Once that happened, the dam stopped being a public project and started functioning as an operating input. That was the real turning point.
We'll be back after a quick break.
Adoption of teens from foster care is a topic not enough people know about, and we're here to change that. I'm April Dinwiddie, host of the new podcast, Navigating Adoption, presented by Adopt US Kids. Each episode brings you compelling real-life adoption stories told by the families that live them with commentary from experts. Visit adoptuskids.org/podcast or subscribe to Navigating Adoption, presented by Adopt US Kids. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families and the Ad Council.
And here's the thing. Once electricity became reliable, businesses started acting. In Southern California, stable hydroelectric power accelerated the growth of energy-intensive industries that had previously been constrained by cost or availability. Manufacturing expanded not because the government directed it, but because utilities could now support it without interruption. Aluminum production was one of the clearest examples. Companies like Kaiser Aluminum expanded operations in regions where hydroelectric power dramatically lowered their operating cost. Aluminum production requires enormous amounts of electricity, and access to dependable power made that large-scale output economically viable. And that capacity mattered long after the Depression eased. As aircraft manufacturing and defense production increased in the years leading into World War II, the industrial base that supported it was already in place. Power availability didn't create those industries, but it removed one of the biggest barriers to them growing to the sizes they needed to be. That same pattern appeared at the municipal level. Cities connected to Hoover Power could plan growth instead of reacting to demand. Utility companies signed longer contracts. Industrial sites clustered where energy was cheapest and most dependable. These weren't symbolic changes. They showed up in sitting decisions, capital expenditure, and operating margins. For Frank Crow, this was the outcome that validated years of all the arguments. The dam didn't succeed because it stood. It succeeded because it ran. quietly, every day, without drama. That reliability turned public infrastructure into private advantage without requiring direct control over business behavior. Hoover Dam demonstrated that infrastructure reshapes markets more effectively when it removes uncertainty, not when it inspires confidence. Build systems that work consistently, and businesses will do the rest. When electricity from Hoover Dam began powering private industry, the project crossed its most important threshold, becoming not just a public works achievement, but a durable operating advantage. And that power started being available on February 11th, 1936. I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the podcast that finds the turning points behind the headlines. To hear more stories like this, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. And if you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to subscribe and leave a quick review. It helps more people find the story behind the business. Want to actually understand business without the fluff or the buzzwords or the MBA language? Start by visiting us at businessdailypodcast.com.
New products to launch? New people to develop? New goals to crush? Workday Go is designed for small and mid-sized businesses. By bringing HR and finance together on one AI platform, you'll have everything you need to think big, go big, and grow big. And activation is fast. It takes just 30 to 60 business days to get you up and running. Simplify your SMB on an AI platform you'll never outgrow. Workday Go.